We're alone. Let's do what must be done, the Apache woman told the rancher, half in jest. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The desert wind struck Red Mesa Station like a living thing, hot, unrelenting, carrying dust that bit at the skin and tasted like rust. The sun hung low, huge and white, baking the rails until they shimmered like silver threads in a furnace. Elias Grant stood beneath the station's awning, hat brim pulled low, boots planted firm on the boards that creaked in the heat. His face was carved with years of hard light and harder silence. Around him, whispers traveled like snakes in dry grass. That's him, the army man who walked away. Deserter, they say. Left his post at Fort Bowie. Couldn't stomach killing Indians, is what I heard. Elias heard every word. He didn't move. Didn't need to. His silence had its own kind of weight. 5 years had passed since he'd turned his back on uniform and orders. The scars on his chest still ached sometimes, the memory sharper than the bullet that gave them. Shot not by an Apache, but by his own man. He'd refused to open fire on a camp of women and children. The shriek of the incoming train ripped through the station. Steam hissed, brakes groaned, and faces pressed against windows disappeared behind clouds of dust. When the doors opened, passengers stepped down. The usual crowd. A preacher, a couple holding hands, a merchant wiping sweat from his brow. Then came her, barefoot, wrapped in a thin wool blanket, eyes black as wet stone. Her hair hung uncombed, tangled by wind and travel. She looked neither left nor right, but every gaze turned toward her anyway, some curious, most hostile. Someone spat near her feet. Elias moved then, slow and deliberate. The platform boards groaned under his boots. He stopped in front of her, voice low and even. "You Naya?" "Yes," she said, her English soft but clear. He reached for the small sack in her hands. "We should go." She hesitated only a moment before nodding. As they turned to leave, the station master, a narrow man with nervous eyes, slipped a folded paper into Elias's hand. "From Fort Bowie," he muttered. "Said to give it to you when she arrived." Elias opened it on the walk to his wagon. The handwriting was as sharp as the man himself, Major Crow's, a gift for the coward who wouldn't finish the job. "She's the last of her kind. Let's see if your mercy still holds, Elias." The words crawled under his skin. He crushed the note in his fist, jaw tight. Beside him, Naya walked in silence, her posture straight despite exhaustion. He glanced at her, bones sharp under sunburned skin, eyes too old for her face. Did she know? Did she realize she was being sent to the man who'd once refused to fire on her people? He wasn't sure. Her face gave nothing away. "Wagons this way," he said quietly. At the edge of town, his old mare flicked her tail against flies. Mothers pulled their children close as the pair passed. Storekeepers turned their backs. Only old Tom, the blacksmith, gave a brief nod, a silent acknowledgement between men who'd seen too much and said too little. The road ahead shimmered with heat. Elias climbed up, took the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. Naya sat beside him, hands folded in her lap. The horizon stretched endless and cruel before them. "Where you take me?" she asked after a long while. "A place called Whisper Creek," he said. "Quiet there. A creek with no water?" she asked dryly. "Sometimes after the rains," he said, almost smiling. Neither spoke again for miles. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air before a storm. As the sun began to dip, painting the land in gold and blood, Elias felt the wind shift. He glanced sideways. Naya's eyes were fixed on the horizon, reflecting fire. He didn't know it yet, but that single glance, defiant, alive, would change everything that followed. As they rolled toward the dying light, Elias felt the past stirring from its grave, and this woman beside him might be the one to finish what the war had started. The wagon rattled across cracked land that had forgotten rain. The wheels threw up clouds of red dust, and the wind carried it into their hair, their mouths, their eyes. Elias kept his gaze on the trail, shoulders stiff beneath the worn fabric of his shirt. He could feel her eyes on him every so often, measuring, questioning, but she didn't speak. When she finally did, her voice startled him. "You served under the one who sent me?" "I did. And he hates you. Seems that way." "Why?" "Because I said no." She studied him for a moment. "That is reason enough for hate?" He gave a humorless laugh. For some men, it's the only one they need. The last mile stretched long. Coyotes called from the ridge as the sun dropped behind the jagged peaks. When they reached Whisper Creek, the world was painted in bruised purples and fading gold. His cabin sat low against the hill, a squat structure of rough timber, a lean-to barn, and a small patch of stubborn corn by the dry creek bed. Smoke drifted faintly from a chimney, the scent of cedar and ash. Elias helped her down. She was lighter than he expected, too light. The bones of her wrists felt fragile in his rough hands. He let go quickly. "You can stay in the loft," he said. "I'll take the floor." She glanced around the cabin, the narrow bed, the chipped table, the rifle hanging above the door, thick with dust. Her gaze lingered on the weapon before she spoke. "You keep it close." "Old habits," he said. "Old fear," she corrected. He didn't argue. Instead, he reached for a jug, poured her water. She drank slowly, not touching his hand as she took it. Her eyes moved over the room again. "No woman lives here," he shook his head. "No." "Why bring me then?" Elias looked toward the window, where dusk pressed against the glass. "Orders," he said finally. "But I don't take them anymore." For a moment, neither moved. The silence between them wasn't hostile. It was cautious, like two animals testing the ground between them. Naya sat near the fire, her blanket slipping from one shoulder. Her hair caught the lamplight, black with copper undertones. She looked both fragile and indestructible. "Do what must be done," she said suddenly, eyes fixed on the flames. Elias froze. "What do you mean?" She shrugged slightly. "You know." It took him a moment to understand, and when he did, the air left his lungs. "That's not why you're here," he said quietly. "It is why women like me are sent," she replied. "And men like you accept." Elias swallowed hard. "Not tonight. Not ever." The fire popped, and for a second neither looked at the other. Then she said softly, "You are not like the others, are you?" He met her eyes. "I'm not sure that's a compliment." Outside, the desert wind moaned through the gaps in the boards, carrying sand that whispered like ghosts. Elias stood abruptly. "I'll tend the horse." When he came back, she was asleep by the fire, her face softer in the glow, her hand curled around a small blue bead at her throat. Something in that sight unspooled in him, something old and aching. He watched her for a long time before lying down on the floorboards, his eyes fixed on the flickering ceiling. Outside, the first cold stars appeared, sharp as nails. As the fire burned low, Elias realized he'd brought home more than a stranger. He'd brought back the part of himself he thought had died at Battle Canyon, and she might be the one to decide what it was worth. The night was long and restless. The cabin creaked as if remembering its own weight. Wind slid through the cracks and rattled the shutters. Elias lay awake on the floor, staring into the shadows that moved across the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Memories pressed too close. The flash of fire, the screams at Battle Canyon, the sound of rifles cracking like bone. A log shifted in the hearth. The faint glow of coals painted Naya's sleeping face in ember light. For a moment, peace, then a whisper, too deliberate to be the wind. He sat up. Naya was awake. She crouched near the fire, a knife glinting faintly in her hand. He didn't move. "If you mean to kill me, best do it clean." Her voice came steady, cold. "You could have killed me once." "You didn't." His heart stopped for a beat. "You were there?" Her eyes found his, dark and steady. "Battle Canyon." The words hit harder than any bullet. He stood slowly, the floorboards groaning under his boots. "I didn't fire," he said. "I know. I saw you fall. Then you know what came after." "Yes." Her voice cracked just once. "I lost everyone." The silence that followed was unbearable. Elias's throat felt like sand. "Your people, they never stood a chance. I tried to stop it." Naya looked down at the knife, then placed it gently on the floor. "I know," she said softly. "That's why you're still alive." She turned back to the fire, and for a moment they both watched the flames eat through the last of the wood. "Why didn't you kill me when you had the chance?" Elias asked quietly. "Because killing you would not bring them back." The simple truth in her tone gutted him more than any accusation. He sat down across from her. "You still could." "Maybe," she said. "But not tonight." Wind pressed against the cabin walls. Outside, a coyote called, lonely and sharp. Elias leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Major Crow sent you here to punish me. Maybe he thought you'd finish what his bullet didn't." Naya's gaze didn't waver, and maybe he thought I'd beg. Will you? She shook her head. No, I've already survived him. I will survive you too. The fire hissed. For the first time in years, Elias didn't feel alone in his guilt. He felt seen, exposed, yes, but understood, even if only in hate or pity. He stood slowly. Take the bed, he said. The floor's good enough for me. She looked up at him. I will stay by the fire. It's warmer. He nodded. Suit yourself. As he turned away, she spoke again, her tone softer. You hide your sorrow behind silence. It doesn't make it smaller. He froze, unsure how to answer. Finally he said, maybe not. But it keeps it from spreading. When he finally lay down, the world outside had quieted. Only the whisper of sand against the door remained. Neither of them slept. But the air between them had shifted. No longer pure hostility. Something more dangerous, something that might one day become trust. By dawn, Elias realized that Mercy had saved him once, but now, with this woman in his home, Mercy might destroy him just the same. Morning came pale and silent. The fire in the hearth had burned to ash. Dust motes drifted in the slanted light that spilled through the cracked shutters. Elias sat on the porch steps, his coffee black and bitter. Beyond the dry creek bed, the desert shimmered silver under a new sun. Everything looked still, yet alive in its own quiet way. The slow crawl of heat, the sound of wings somewhere far off. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Naya stepped out barefoot, her blanket now folded neatly over one arm. Her hair was braided, the strands glossy and black against the morning light. She didn't look at him right away. Instead, she watched the horizon as if searching for a sign only she could read. You sleep? He asked. Enough, she said. Dream? Always, he nodded. There wasn't much else to say. They worked in silence that morning. Elias repaired a fence near the corral while Naya gathered water from the well, her movements quiet and sure. When the pump jammed, she muttered something sharp in Apache and kicked it. The sound made Elias chuckle before he caught himself. She turned, frowning. You laugh at me? He shook his head. At the pump. He stepped forward, pressed the handle, and a stream of cold water burst over both their hands. Naya gasped, startled. The chill made them both laugh then, genuine, surprised. For a moment, the years between them vanished. You twist it first, he said. Then it obeys? She asked. Most things do if you learn how. She looked at him for a long beat, the edge of a smile lingering on her lips. And what about people? He hesitated. Harder to fix than pumps. Later, he showed her the small garden he'd coaxed from the stubborn soil, scraggly corn, a few beans, a patch of half-dead squash. Naya knelt, fingers brushing the cracked earth. You plant too deep, she said. How deep, then? Less. The seed must feel the light or it forgets what it is. She dug carefully, adjusting the soil with hands that moved like memory. Elias watched, realizing this woman, sent as punishment, was teaching him to keep things alive. As the day grew hotter, they shared what little food there was. Dried meat, hard bread, water from a clay jug. No words passed between them for a while. Just the rhythmic sound of chewing and the slow beat of their hearts filling the silence. When the sun began to fall, Elias found her sitting by the fire pit, mending an old shirt with thread she'd found in his drawer. You can sew, he said. I can do many things. I'm starting to believe that. She looked up at him then, and in that glance, simple, level, unafraid, something shifted again. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Why do you live alone? She asked. Too many ghosts, he said. They follow even into the desert. Yeah, he murmured. Guess they do. Night fell soft and blue. The first stars blinked awake. From inside, the firelight flickered through the window, turning her face gold. For the first time in years, Elias didn't dread the silence. As the moon rose over Whisper Creek, Elias realized that the woman he'd been sent to break was rebuilding something in him instead, and he wasn't sure if that was mercy or danger. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythms of Whisper Creek began to take shape. The land, stubborn and proud, started to soften beneath their hands. Rows of corn stood taller. The creek whispered again after a brief rain. Even the air felt different, less empty, more forgiving. Elias repaired the roof while Naya tended to the garden. In the evenings, they shared quiet meals by the fire. She learned to read, tracing words from his old logbooks with careful fingers. He taught her the sound of letters. She taught him the meaning of stillness. Sometimes she sang, soft songs in her language that made the cabin seem like it belonged to another world. When she stopped, he often found himself waiting for the next note. One afternoon, as the sky turned the color of hammered copper, the distant rumble of hooves broke the quiet. Elias set down his hammer, eyes narrowing toward the ridge. "Rider," he said. Dust rose behind a single horse. When it crested the hill, his stomach turned to stone. The man wore a uniform that caught the light, an arrogance that had never faded. Major Crow. He rode close, reined in hard, and dismounted. His boots struck the ground like verdicts. "You've aged poorly, Grant," Crow said, voice smooth as oil. "But I see you found company." Naya stood on the porch, unmoving. Elias stepped forward, his jaw tight. "You've got no business here." "On the contrary," Crow said, holding up a folded paper. "Orders from the territorial office. The woman is government property, to be returned to San Carlos." Elias laughed once, dry, humorless. "She's a free person." Crow's smile sharpened. "Freedom? You forfeited that word when you defied your uniform." Naya's voice cut through the rising heat. "You burned my village. You killed my family." Crow didn't flinch. "Necessary acts, child. The price of progress." Elias's hand twitched toward the revolver on his hip, a motion so small it could have been a breath. Crow noticed. "Go on, then. Make me a martyr. See how fast they hang you." For a moment, the world went still. The only sound was the desert wind scraping across the dry grass. Then a distant shout broke through. More riders cresting the ridge. At first, Elias thought Crow had brought soldiers, but as the figures drew near, he recognized familiar faces. Tom Baker, the blacksmith, Harper from the store, Widow Alden with her gray braid whipping in the wind, a dozen townsfolk, all armed, all grim. They surrounded the yard in silence. Crow's smirk faltered. Tom swung down from his horse. "We heard the major was calling folks property again," he said. "Came to see if that was true." Crow bristled. "This is official army business." Harper shook his head. "Not anymore. You don't wear that power here." Elias met the major's gaze. "It's over, Crow." For the first time, the man's composure cracked. He reached for his pistol, but before he could clear the holster, the metallic chorus of a dozen rifles stopped him cold. The widow's voice carried from the line. "Don't. We're all too tired for another war." Crow froze, hand trembling at his side. He looked around, the weight of his own ruin finally pressing down. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "You think this savage and this traitor deserve peace?" Naya stepped down from the porch, walking toward him slowly, the wind tugging at her braid. "We don't need you to give it," she said. "We already took it." For a long, brittle second, no one breathed. Then Crow's shoulders sagged. He dropped the paper. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," Elias said. "But not today." Crow mounted his horse and rode off, his figure shrinking until it vanished into the horizon's heat. The crowd stayed silent until the dust settled. Then Tom lowered his shotgun. "He won't be back." Words already traveling about what he did. "The army'll deal with him before the desert does." Elias looked at the townsfolk, people who had once turned their backs on him. He nodded, unable to speak. One by one, they rode away, leaving the ranch quiet again. Naya turned to Elias, her expression unreadable. "You would have fought him. I would have died trying. You always choose the hard road." He gave a small smile. "Only one I ever knew." She stepped closer. "We're alone now." "Seems that way." Her eyes softened. "Then let's do what must be done." The words carried no threat this time, and only truth. He reached for her hand, rough and warm and human. Behind them, the sun sank low, painting the desert gold. Wind stirred the corn. Water shimmered faintly in the creek bed, as if life itself had remembered how to return. Elias and Naya stood side by side, watching light fade over the valley. For the first time since Battle Canyon, neither was running. Justice had found its way to them at last, and peace, fragile but real, had taken root in the desert.